Today, I'm going to be giving the first part of a two-part lecture series on integrating non-dual states. This is a subject that is very special to me. It's something that I feel is being under-examined, underutilized in mental health. And as psychedelic therapies are becoming more and more common, I think it's very important that we gain a deeper awareness of these states of being and gain more language around them, as well as ideas of how to bridge the worlds between the non-dual states that clients are often experiencing, touching upon, having glimpses of, and are at regular waking lives. How do we bring these incredible states, these moments of God consciousness, into our everyday being? So that's what I'm going to be walking through today. This is intended as a lecture for ketamine therapists or other psychedelic therapists, but it could be useful for anybody who has experience with non-dual states or interest in non-dual states. I'm going to go in depth into what exactly this means, but in the most basic sense, I would say that non-dual states are those moments when there is no longer a subject-object split. And they are most easily accessed, most commonly seen during non-ordinary states of consciousness. Medicine states can bring this on, meditation, ecstatic dance, breath work. There's many different ways to access that place of pure consciousness and pure being. And there's many different ways to understand and bring it back. So to start out, why does non-duality matter now? I think it matters so much because, one, more people are glimpsing it. More people are experiencing it. As we are in this psychedelic renaissance, we're in a time when people are having these incredible experiences and not sure what to do with them. And most of them are not being integrated. Most of them are not even being valued. For me, I've had so many clients come back from a ketamine journey and say, not much happened. I felt a deeper love than I've ever felt, or I felt more peaceful than I've ever felt, but there not really much happened, not much came through. And I think it's such a missing piece if we are not supporting our clients in looking more deeply at what was that feeling of love or peace. And how did it resonate in your cells? What were you actually feeling in that moment? And like when they come out of the journey, can we just sit with it a little longer? Can we help ourselves to feel that peace? There's a lot of push towards understanding the content, looking at psychedelic therapies through a more psychodynamic lens, or using the content that comes up to then kind of filter through IFS, things like this. And yes, I would never say that's not important. I do a lot of that myself, looking at the archetypal imagery, working in the metaphor. Beautiful. Yes. And there's another piece where clients often don't have the content to come back. They've accessed states where words don't exist, where there's just not, there's not language to really describe where they've been. And so helping to put value to that embodied state and bring it back can be so powerful. I think that we're also really in a time right now where we have information overload. We have social media just exploding. There's an interesting correlation between the rise of the psychedelic renaissance, the rise of social media, the rise of capitalism. All these things are just at an apex right now that is creating such an amplification of duality in our world. When I say duality, it's a big topic, but in many ways, it's the things that show us that we're separate, the things that we as dualistic beings here on this earth can easily fall into. Systems that tell us that what affects you doesn't affect me. What affects them, the pain that's caused to them, doesn't affect me. And that's pulling away. On one end, there's a non-dual awareness where we believe that everything we think, feel, do is in some way affecting the world around us. On the other end, there's people that say, what I do, how I hurt them, it matters not at all. It doesn't even hurt me, And there's people who've split themselves to such a point that they can hurt others and not feel the pain. And that's part of the human experience. That is an expression of what humans can be when we allow our dualistic nature to be driving. And it's not in our in the best, highest and best evolution of us as people to not care about each other, to not care about the earth, to not care about humanity and the animals and the planet and all that stuff that right now is coming to a head. A lot of it is the low-grade anxiety that people are going through life in, which will bring on dualistic thinking. When we are in a reactive state, our mind is going to create binaries. I'll go more into that in a bit because it's a really important part, but also inflammatory media that is designed to dysregulate us, to have us want to come back for more information, to have us feel confused, to have us feel angry and blaming towards others. This is an amplification of human dualistic thinking and experiencing that is happening a lot right now. So, non-dual states can help people to access kind of the opposite. Many people have medicine experiences where they have an embodied feeling of everything being connected and can come out of it with this truth of, wow, like the way that I think and feel and act is affecting people around me, and it does matter. And I don't want to be a good person out of fear of being shamed. I want to be a good person because it feels right to me and it makes me feel better, and I like being a good person. So we as ketamine therapists, we're psychedelic guides. And, sometimes that's kind of glossed over, but the reality is that is what we're doing. And for many of us, this is very much a calling. For me, this walking between worlds, supporting people and walking between worlds and translating between worlds is something that it is me. I must be doing this to some extent. It's a passion of mine. And part of that is we are, in our role, we are supporting people in glimpsing these non-dual states. And non-dual states can be seen as a form of enlightenment, and just because you touch it, just because you glimpse it, does not mean we're enlightened. I'm not fully enlightened. You're probably not fully enlightened. But like when you have those moments of feeling the interconnected nature of everything, it can be so powerful. And it can be very easy to say, oh, that's just the medicine. That wasn't real. And that's what we as psychedelic guides can help people to feel the realness, feel the importance and the beauty of it. Can turn this non-dual state into embodied ego flexibility, which is really so much the goal of all of this. Is, what is it like to be the person in the everyday? How does it feel to be existing in their mind, body, soul? And bringing this down into something that is embodied relationally and narratively. So we're human machines, and we have these different ways of being. We can have an embodied feeling that we feel in our body, in the energy around our body. There's things that can very much go through our minds. We kind of need to have things have a narrative sense. It's just something that has evolved for most humans in this society, and the West, the North. We're very intellectual, very thinking, very puzzling, and I mean, maybe it's not everybody, but it's many of us, and it's definitely me, that there's something about I need to have like there needs to be a narrative with words to describe for me to hold something. And that can be tricky with non-dual states because there's no words in those states. But to bring it into our everyday life, there's often that intermediate step of going through the mind. And the mind in some way can then help you to remember in the body, and they can have an interplay. But also relationally is really important. How does any experience we're having affect the way that we are in our relationships? I mean, and this is a huge one for me. So much of my work as a therapist is relational stuff, because if we aren't improving the way we relate to ourselves and others, what are we doing? I don't want to just keep looping the same old trauma and going back and looking at it and like, yes, that's important and we're going to do that at some point. But how is it showing up in our attachment traumas, in the relationships, with the openness, with the vulnerability, the intimacy, all of these things, and the care that we offer to others? That's really just a super important part of integrating anything, but especially when we're talking about non-dual states, what's that going to look like in our relationships with others? Are we truly becoming more compassionate, or are we just going into these medicine states as a joyride and experiencing enlightenment and then coming back and returning to past patterns? Now, that's the thing about these non-dual states, non-ordinary states, is we are capitalizing on the ego plus the neuroplasticity that exists coming out of the journey, that the journey brings on this neuroplasticity where we can then be the author of the new script of how our mind is going to work, how the neural pathways are going to flow. And that's really exciting. It's a lot of power and responsibility. And so we, as the psychedelic guides and therapists, are really there to help base our clients' work on the values that they have brought to us. What is it that they value in their life? Where do they find that they are out of alignment with their values in the ways that they're thinking, feeling, and behaving? And how can we use these neuroplastic states to help their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to more closely align with their values rather than the habitual states that they've come to in their life? And, the experiences of non-dual states really are going to begin to change a person's value system. The more that you can glimpse the interconnectivity of everything, the more you're just naturally going to care about other people. But if you're going to come back, tell yourself you were just high, it was just a drug thing, it doesn't matter, it's not going to stick. It needs to be embodied, it needs to be practiced relationally, and the value of it needs to be held. A big thing that we're looking to do is to move this from a state, is the way AEDP says it, to a trait. And I think that's a really nice way to look at it, is that we have these states of embodied experience, of thinking, and then we want to move them into a habitual trait. This needs to be our new normal. And sometimes for a while, it's a little clunky and it has to be more of a conscious act. But when we are repeatedly working on setting that intention towards the value-based thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, it's going to create a new neural pathway that's going to make it naturally become a personality, behavioral trait, rather than something we need to work so hard for. And so the medicine can really help to create that neuroplasticity to allow that change to happen, which is so exciting. And what makes something really stick is when we can link the left and the right brain. So we can have the right brain experience, but like I was saying, we're humans. Our machinery requires some linking between the hemispheres. Our embodied practices require the mind to say, yes, do this. I'm going to, this benefits me. So it all needs to work together. We're creating new neural pathways within the brain that are linking these new value-based ways of being. When we can help clients to understand the value of these states and the philosophical underpinnings, they can create narratives within themselves that can anchor in this embodied experience. These are things, non-dual states are something that have been studied and explored since the beginning of time, debated between different wisdom traditions. Like, this stuff is huge. And I'm a little ambitious to say I'm going to talk on it because, I mean, what right do I have? I don't know. I've been there a lot. I've had a lot of experiences with non-dual states, and I have a lot of experience as a therapist and a ketamine therapist. And, so I'm just throwing my voice out there because I would rather have too many people talking about this than not enough, because it's a missed opportunity for the evolution of humanity, of the evolution of our consciousness, that we're not really working to integrate this stuff. So one of the ways I describe this, what it can be like to have a non-dual awareness in our everyday life, is through the metaphor of riding the ever-cresting wave of life. And when I send people in to their ketamine journeys, I often will talk about this before in our preparation and in my guided meditation as they open up the journey. Because what that's talking about is really taking our attentional awareness that is pinging all around. Our attention is our greatest currency. And it tends to be really time traveling into the past and really time traveling into the future. Our mind loves to be ruminating on things that happened, good or bad, and focusing on what's coming up, what's going to be happening next. How can I plan so that everything happens right? And we're not going to get rid of that capacity because that's amazing. Like, it's incredible to have a human mind that can do all of that. We have an advanced level of consciousness that allows that. And that is not our highest and only way of using our consciousness. When we can bring in the time traveling mind and exist in the present, it's kind of special. That is the place of the ever-cresting wave. That is the place I describe to clients when they're going into their ketamine journeys, that you are just going to be on that ever-cresting wave of life. You're not thinking about what just happened or what's gonna happen. You're just in pure experience. In that space, as the more that you can allow it, you'll start to notice in the ketamine journey, the thoughts can just dissolve and you're just there. And that is a space of pure presence, pure consciousness, surrender. I like to think of it as love frequency. And it's a space that can open into that non-duality. It can open into the ego transcendent experiences. People talk about it as ego death, and that's kind of cool and dramatic, and I'm not against it. And I think death is kind of harsh, and we're not here to destroy our ego. We need that ego. I want to think, I want to plan, I want to experience the world, because the ego in many ways is what allows us to be separate, what allows us to witness. Having a witnessing mind is so cool. But we want to begin to see it. We want to have the ego be something that is a tool that we're using rather than us. Often I'll describe it like, you think the ego is me. My thoughts are me. This is just all I know is me. My thoughts, my feelings, my actions, me. And then you can have these non-ordinary states. You can have these non-dual glimpses, and you see yourself without all that witnessing, without the thinking. And so you're like, well, what is ego? And it's like the ego is a little friend over here on your shoulder. I like to make him kind of cute. And, so it's just that the loosening of the ego is me into the ego is part of me, that lets us start to utilize the ego mind as a tool rather than the ego driving and saying, this is me. It's something that we can work with and we can see. It's about seeing the lenses of our ego, seeing the ways that it perceives things. How is that witness perceiving? And the more that we can create that loosening, the more that we can be the conscious creators of our lives. And that just gets me so excited. So when we can close down the time traveling mind, be on the crest, the ever cresting wave of life, we are opening up to that place of magic and miracles and synchronicities, and also of just, being here. Ram Dass says, be here now. It's like being in the present. And what a gift. So duality is that subject-object split. Anything that creates subject-object split. I mean, that's a very simplified way to say it, but it's anything where there is that witness of you and me. And it's necessary, it's important, it's a survival mechanism. It is what makes this game of life so cool and amazing. Many of us believe that we are non-dual beings here to experience duality, because duality is cool. Like, it's fun to think and to witness and to be separate from others. The light's getting very dramatic. Our minds are incredible, and our minds are schema-making machines, as I like to describe it. And in many ways, the default mode network is the schema making machine. It is all interwoven in with the ego mind, the thinking mind. The schema making machine is what begins in childhood as a way to survive. If you think about a child going through life, this lighting is getting very dramatic. I leave it though, I like it. If you think about a child going through life, they see everything. They see every leaf, every splash of water as like this new incredible experience. And if you have a psychedelic journey, you sometimes feel that again. It's that newness. That's the default mode network kind of turned off. Kids haven't established it. They haven't created all these schemas. And it's wonder and it's magic and it's being in presence. A child is just there, and that ant is the most amazing thing they've ever seen. And their mind is not traveling anywhere. It's just there with the ant. It's there in their game and their imagination. I mean, play is such as a non-ordinary state of consciousness, most certainly. And, we could go into that, probably not too much today, but, when you're in a play state, you're in a flow state, you are accessing that space where when you're working with children, it's their entire unconscious mind, subconscious mind is often being enacted in the play. And there's just so much to work with once that opens and they're allowed to. It's really a self-healing mechanism in children. But that's another topic for another day that I could get way into. So the mind is a schema-making machine. It creates these schemas so that it's not overstimulated by the world. When we can say, oh, I see that's water. I know what water does. And it's not a thought process. It's just that default mode network is just creating these systems. I'm not going to look at every blade of grass like it's the most amazing thing. I'm just going to read it all as grass. And I know what it does. I know how it feels. I know how it grows. I don't need to think about it. So we're just constantly creating schemas. We're constantly collecting data consciously and unconsciously. And also the mind is always puzzling. The mind wants to know. The ego mind wants to know. It loves that. It wants answers to everything. And so that is an important function of the mind. The ego, the default mode network is doing all these things. And then it's creating that whole system of duality that we are existing in. We just know that is that, and this is me, and it just all starts to fall into place, and you think about it, kids out there, like, everything's amazing, and then so many adults are just going through life so ho-hum with no wonder or no awe, because it's almost, just too hardened. That default mode network is just established and everything just seems like the same. And that is a form of ego rigidity that really holds people back. It's the place when we're looking at what is the source of so much mental, dis-ease, unwellness, struggle, is rigid ego patterns, thought patterns that are also just calcified. When everything just seems like this just is, it's not a happy place to be. When there isn't the flexibility to take in new information, it's really difficult for people. Um, and these types of non-ordinary states, these non-dual experiences can bring back that wonder when you allow yourself to have the default mode network turn off, you allow yourself to really go in deep. It's a self-healing mechanism that happens in the mind. Same thing as with meditation. It's, going into that deep, deep safety is healing in so many ways. So duality can be limiting when it's seen as absolute truth. I know this about me. I know this about you. I know this about the world. It's limiting. It's creating these just entire ways of being that are not feeling good. But I like to describe this as kind of on a continuum from when we're born. Where do we come from? I'm not exactly sure, but we're one with our mother when we're in the womb. We are in this space that is probably pretty close to how you describe non-duality. Of course, many of us have different, you can hear things from the outside. There might be some parts that are not comfortable, but there's this, a warmth, a oneness, just feeling connected and literally being inside of another human. So if you think of that as kind of a version of non-duality, then born into the world, born into duality, separate from the mother, and just kind of then there's just a pushing and pulling all through life between merging and separateness. You think about a child learning to walk, they have that, they pull away and then they get fearful, then they come back. They get older, kids start to just have more of their own ideas, and then they kind of come back to the parents, and it's just the push-pull. And then you go into teen years, and there's so much separation, and really moving into duality, there's so much of like me. It's just like each phase, there's a version where the child wants to just say, oh no, I'm me, and I'm separate. And there's like such a power in it. And I really think that it's like it's what we're here to do. We're here to experience duality. So, there's no shade on the angry teenagers or any of us who want to feel that separateness. Like, it's incredible. It's powerful. We have so many people right now in the world who are just like convinced that we're all separate and they can do horrible things to other people. And it's okay because we are all separate and we're not connected or, interdependent on each other. And that's like just the game that a lot of people are playing. And hopefully some of us are waking up and supporting others and waking up to, some other ways of perceiving this. So we're on this path. We want to experience duality. Then we get into our adulthood and we want to just, what is the ultimate duality? Capitalism. Oh my God. Don't get me started. Capitalism is that space where I can be an object for earning and you can be an object for earning, and we can use other people to gain control, gain money. It's just, stripping the humanity out. Can just be these systems where what I'm doing to you doesn't really matter to me because I'm gaining capital, money, it's a whole thing, but it's dualism really expanded. It's huge. And then what happens? We get to this place in life where we start to say, wait a minute, is this all there is? I've been spending my whole life heading as strong as I can to this dualism, to just thinking about me, taking care of myself and working and trying to be separate and trying to find what my identity is and my separateness. And then people wake up and start to say, wait a minute, this doesn't actually feel good or right. There's some time in the midlife, whenever that is for you, your 30s, your 40s, whatever, you start to question. Some people 20s, I don't know, some people teens, start to question, is this really true? Does this feel right to me? Does this feel right inside of me? And we start seeking that like inner memory of the non-dual, this inner experience of we're all connected, and just wanting to find a place where we came from in some ways, like, and starting to follow the threads back of, as you're doing that work to where did I lose myself? Each trigger is a path back to a part of yourself that you exiled. These parts of our soul that we separated out in exchange for, avoidance of shame or guilt, things like that. So, we start in non-duality, we go all into duality, and then when that gets to a breaking point, we start to move back into non-dual awareness. So I love that little analogy. I hope you enjoyed it. And duality is not bad. I hope that's coming across. Not bad. It's amazing. It's just an incomplete view. When we're just thinking ourselves as dualistic beings, we're missing very important parts here. So dualistic thinking can affect psychological and behavioral patterns. The mind prefers the efficiency of binaries. When I said earlier, our mind wants to know, our mind wants to believe that there's answers to things. The mind struggles when there is any kind of paradox, dissonance. It just wants to keep puzzling. That's part of why the media gets us so hard, because they'll present all these different things that don't make any sense. And so then we just want to keep going back to understand and to puzzle and, to buy the product that they're selling, thinking that we're informing ourselves. It's a topic for another day. But the mind prefers the efficiency of binaries. And that is just part of the software of being humans, but we have the capacity to update that. We can create ways of working with our mind based on values, and that when we can see that lens of our minds simplifying things and wanting to create categories, put things in boxes, that can be a sign for us to awaken and say, wait a minute, does it need to be existing in these boxes, or can there be space for gradation and spectrum on almost any topic? The mind has discomfort with dissonant ideas, and it can just collapse into certainty. And this pattern is something to be so mindful of, because it is our awareness of cognitive dissonance that can help us to awaken to our true nature. When we continue to evolve and allow ourselves to see that cognitive dissonance between perhaps how we are thinking, feeling, behaving, and how we believe at that point of our awareness, it allows us to shift and to rewrite the coding for how we want to exist as humans. So it's a really important one, and it's one that, when we access these non-dual states, these non-ordinary states of consciousness, but especially all the way into the non-dual, it gives us that awareness that everything can exist, everything can coexist, and we don't need to keep trying to categorize everything into binaries. As much as the mind, our sweet ego mind, prefers it, our deeper soul, our awareness that goes beyond that, has capacity for more. And shame can amplify our dualistic interpretations. This is such a big one. Moving into good, bad, worthy, unworthy. When we are feeling shame, we are going to buy into that stuff so easily. Especially if you're feeling, I'll throw guilt in there, feeling guilt or shame, and you're going to have somebody that say, oh, just do it this way and you won't have to feel that. Or somebody who's going to take away your guilt or shame, saying, oh no, you're not wrong. You don't need to feel that dissonance between your behaviors and your value-based systems. And then you're lost, that it's guilt and shame have a difficult time when there is not a split with good, bad, and they want to just to fall into that so that they can go away. If you say, oh no, I wasn't bad, then the guilt and shame can go, rather than saying, oh, this thing I did actually didn't feel good and it's out of alignment with how I want to be. I'm going to feel the guilt and shame. That allows me to shift out of the cognitive dissonance of my existence and to evolve into a higher state of being. Okay, now this part is so important to me. Understanding duality and the nervous system. because this part right here, this is like the major code of how do we work with our human system to override the dualistic nature of our humanness. Okay, so one of the issues that's going on right now is people are existing in a chronic low-grade anxiety. Like the world is seeming so crazy. There's so much going on and so much media, so much just really, fear-based things, content to consume. And it is shifting what our baseline nervous system state is. So our human machine, when it gets reactive, that can be really like any emotional reaction, but like anything that's going to be kind of fear-based or angry or even like just sad, like big emotions, is going to make that the amygdala fire off, and the prefrontal cortex, which, as you know, is responsible for higher level reasoning, functioning. It's the part that is like the mature adult brain. It's going to decrease its functioning. This is by design. This is what the human brain does to react to threat, to keep us alive. This is so helpful when we're out in the jungle and there's a lion coming after us and our amygdala flashes and our prefrontal cortex shuts down. It's amazing because it lets our mind just function in safe, unsafe, good, bad, left, right, up, down. Thank God for this system in our human machine. It has kept us alive for so long. We have survived. There's just so many humans here because this all works so well. But the problem is that the same internal mechanism is being generalized and used when we're just feeling stressed by something. I could read an article that's going to make me have an emotional reactive state and is going to put me in that type of mindset where my prefrontal cortex is not fully functioning. When the prefrontal cortex is not fully functioning, we are in binaries, we are in dualistic thinking. That mindset that keeps us safe from the lion that tells us safe, unsafe, good, bad is getting applied to everything in life, but we don't realize it. That is the really big part here that I want everybody to come away from this talk with an understanding of, because we need to awaken to it as it's happening. But we can't even see it from within, because within, literally the part of your brain that is supposed to be assessing and looking for nuance is not functioning. So that means that what it's telling you, what your brain is informing you about the world, is based on a threat response. You're in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn state, thinking that you are thinking with your full brain. So this is a really big deal, because that is putting us into dualistic thinking. We are by design in a dualistic mindset when we are in a reactive state. So if we are going around with a chronic low-grade reactivity, especially people who have a history of trauma, complex trauma, it's changing the way that your brain works. You have a lot of anxiety, depression. You're constantly in this type of reactive state. And it's like a hellscape, right? Because, we've all felt it when you're really sad. And then your brain, I've seen this in myself and I'm like, what? It's the way our functions work. My brain will tell me, oh, you're all bad. You're the worst. And it's like, then there'll be a little part of me that will kind of awaken and say, well, that's not true, because I thought it was amazing like this morning. But that is the mind moving into dualism and into binaries. It's just splitting. It's, we think about that's the tendency, the cliche of the borderline personality disorder is everything split. Well, sure it is, because what creates somebody to have a borderline personality disorder? lots and lots of trauma. And lots of trauma are going to create a nervous system that is highly reactive, has a difficult time regulating. And when it's reactive, it's going to be split. It's going to have to make things into good and bad. It's that simplification that keeps us safe from the tiger, but is not helping us in navigating the world and relationships using our full attentional awareness. So, with this, so often I'll say to people, when you're dysregulated and you want to try to think your way out of a problem, that's not the way. If you can work on regulating your nervous system, often the thinking's not a problem. It's all going to fall into place. Sometimes, of course, there's so much work we can do in understanding and changing our thought patterns, but oftentimes it's so much more about regulating the nervous system, and then the thoughts will regulate. The prefrontal cortex will feel safe to come back online. The binaries will start to diminish, and there will be that nuanced thinking that just allows the problems to not seem so bad. It's not either good or bad. Now it's like, oh, it's like kind of a problem, but I can tolerate it because it's not that big a deal. So this is really, really huge. And this is why understanding non-dual states and integrating them is so important right now in the world, because dualistic thinking is rampant, because so is anxiety, and so is chronic low-grade reactivity. So, you watch the news, it gets you worked up. It's feeding you things that are telling you, oh, this group's bad and this group's good. And when you're in that dualistic reactive mind state, you're going to buy that more because you want to exist in the binaries. You want to believe there's a good guy and a bad guy. So it gets reinforced through the media that you're consuming and through the nervous system state that you are allowing yourself to move into. You see what I mean? And so you just can't trust your mind in those states. So I'm not going to go too much into nervous system regulation here, but the basic gist is, and what I work with so many of my clients and myself, is noticing when you're starting to get dysregulated and attending to your nervous system as a first line of defense. Like, it's very, very important to keep yourself more regulated, because we've just, kind of forgotten that in a lot of ways as we're going through life, and it can feel good to get dysregulated in some ways. Being in a cortisol state, letting adrenaline surges power us through the day can feel like, good. We can feel like super productive and like we're doing great at our jobs or whatever, but the cost that it has on our cognitive functioning, our embodied states of peace, is huge. And I'm hoping that more and more people will be able to shift out of this through understanding these non-dual states and through integrating them into lived experiences in the day-to-day. Just really regulating the nervous system allows the body to take in so much more, to be able to exist in nuance and exist in peace. One of the things about non-dual states that's so amazing is it's to get there, the nervous system has to be totally relaxed. And that's why, ketamine is such a great way for people to experience it in the therapeutic setting. Is there's outside the therapeutic setting, it's not always going to happen like that. But in the therapeutic setting, when there is a container created for deep safety for the client, it can bring them to a space of peace that is just not reachable otherwise. And in that state of peace, feeling that wholeness, feeling what it's like to be a human being, not just a human doing, it's so powerful. And as we're moving towards the goal of ego flexibility for all, these states of being can be so helpful in shifting that. Ego rigidity can really be holding us back from shifting and evolving. The difference is, it's that flexibility that we can have allows us to have new experiences that let us change and shift. And so much of when we're looking at mental health issues it's really a matter of how rigid is the person's ego. How much does that ego have flexibility to adapt, and as new experiences come in, to shift and change. These non-dual states can really help to soften that ego state. Like I was saying before, once we can start to see the ego as a part of me, my thoughts, feelings, behaviors are a part of me, but not me, we can have a relationship to it. We can take that witnessing mind, which is the ego, and use the ego to witness the ego and to work with it. It's kind of fun, right? Say, the only thing that's strong enough to transcend the ego is the ego in some ways. So the ego is letting us see these parts of ourselves and work with it to shift and change and evolve, as for ourselves and just for all of humanity. Ego flexibility, rigidity is more of a personality state. Duality is more of like a cognitive function within that. So they're somewhat separate, but they are just so interwoven together. And when we're thinking about things through a lens of mental health, it's just so important to just really see that part about the ego flexibility as a goal to work towards. Like, what are we doing with all of this? We want to have deeper flexibility to be able to work relationally. Ego flexibility is going to show up as when you're having a conflict with somebody, you're able to see multiple perspectives. You're able to hold the dissonance and the paradox without collapsing into certainty and binaries. And it's just going to make our ability to relate to others and relate to ourselves so much more rich, and give so much more space to have that introspection and to shift the way that we're existing. Ego rigidity is a protective mechanism. It has, helped many people to not completely fragment off, to give them something to hold on to. But it's also something that we as therapists can help to support people in evolving out of. But on this subject, it's also important to know that those two things are not one and the same. And you can have ego transcending experiences, and you can still be very rigid in your ego functioning. So, these all need to interplay together. Transcending dualism for moments does not mean that is going to shift your entire ego, unless you really put in the work and support yourself in creating that shift. And often that takes support of a therapist or a friend who's very tapped into this type of stuff, or partners, friends, anybody that you're working with, to have them be clear mirrors for you, help them to see the ways that you're showing up. And when we're talking about these non-dual states, when we can surround ourselves with others who remind us of the value of these experiences and the value of continuing to strive to have greater compassion for ourselves and others, continuing to strive to have a greater ego flexibility so that we can allow others to have their opinions and have conversations with so many different types of people. It's just going to, it changes everything. The more that we can tend to our nervous systems and heal our nervous systems by not allowing them to become so dysregulated, by not believing that our whole role in this life is to be dysregulated worker bees, but remembering that there's so much value in our human beingness, and that we can take breaks, we can pendulate out of the stressful situations, allow our nervous system to come back into regulation, and trusting that when we do that, the ways that we think, feel, and behave are going to be more in aligned with our values. They're going to be more aligned with the compassion-based focus that we have and are striving for in our lives and all of our relationships. So thank you so much. I love this subject, and it's so beautiful to share. And I would love to hear from anyone who listened through this whole thing, any thoughts that you have on this subject. If there's any parts that really resonated, or any parts that you were like, what are you talking about, Leah? You got kind of weird there. Because, you know, I go on tangents. I get overexcited. But I love talking about this stuff. So thank you.